I thought someone else had found the secret room in my church. By Simple Homework 3510. Churches always have secrets. They are too old and too important not to. I used to enjoy the fact that I knew all the ins and outs of that building, but now I wish that I didn't. Over the course of the last year, I've been slowly earning back my parents' trust. If you ever went to college and met a guy who started out a devout Christian and ended up a drunken failure, you know what I was like. It apparently happens fairly often. People like me just can't handle suddenly not having their overbearing parents no longer watching them, and go a little too far with their freedom. I dropped out and had to crawl back to my family, where I went through the 10 steps, and I like to think I've turned myself around. Despite my thoughts, however, my parents have been reluctant to trust me again. So in order to get them back on my side, I've been doing a number of favors for the church on my own time, as it's quite frankly the only thing that seems to work. Slowly, I've been inching my way towards my failure being a joke that we laugh about, instead of a thing we pretend didn't happen. Today, I had volunteered to get rid of some rust that had started growing on the metal legs of some stairs on the church balcony. Rust dissolver takes some time to set in before you can actually scrub it away, so I had a half hour to wait, and I unfortunately got nostalgic. Both my parents worked within the school that the church was associated with. Over the 24 years of my life, I've lived and breathed this building. I know about the secret tunnel that was made in the 80s. I know about the hidden elevator that's used just for a storage room. I've been in every room of the original campus. Until today, I thought I was the only person who had. In order to get across how strange and unsettling what happened is, I need to give some background on the church as a building. The original campus was created over 100 years ago by German immigrants. The building was made out of brick and has glass windows so old, valuable, and irreplaceable that they are protected by bulletproof glass. 50 years after that, they built on the first addition. The church has a Gothic revival architecture, the kind that you see stand out in the middle of a modern city. The first addition is simply a block. It's a brick block that they built onto the side. It is as simple as can be. Then they started getting the checks. During my lifetime, the church made 2 more additions to the original campus, modern and sleek in a way that contrasted that old German brick. In a way, you can almost view the passage of time by walking around the city block that the church had spread out to. From there, at least 3 other schools had been branched out. When I went to the school on the original campus once every 2 months or so, we would have an assembly where a new comically large check would be presented from some incorporation or company, and all the students would all thank the nice businessman in unison. Every room in this campus is used. Kids are pouring out of the windows during the school year, and in the summer, multiple groups use the campus as a base of operations. Out of all the hard-to-find nooks and crannies, only 2 places are really secret: the tunnels I mentioned earlier, and the second tower. Like any good church worth its salt, this one has a bell tower. It's used every week and isn't a secret at all. But when they built the church back in the 1900s, they copied blueprints from a church back in Germany that had 2 towers. At the time, the large checks had not started coming in, so they didn't end up finishing the second tower. Instead, they roofed it off at around about half of the 3/4 of the height of the main tower and left it. From the outside, you can see the difference clear as day. Until today, I thought that me and my dad were the only ones who knew how to get to it. As I said, when I was waiting for the rust dissolver to set in, I got nostalgic. The balcony where I was cleaning was in the upper part of the church and had a small door that took you to the bell tower. I had been up there a few times for different reasons, but the one that I always remember was when I went up on September 11th, 2013. And yes, before you comment, I know I've been talking about towers, but the only relation that date has to this story is why I was going up there. A fire station is about 2 blocks from the church. I was born right before 9/11, so every year of my life except the first, the bells have been rung in 4 sets of 5 to honor the firefighters that gave their lives. Specifically, what the school does is they bring all the kids out and line them up by the station and have them all stand still with the firefighters. I was 12 at the time and had gone on that silent walk a number of times. Students never really stayed quiet, and the teachers had to stay on their toes in order to try and keep the whole thing presentable. A few teachers came down with the same flu some kid had brought in, and it was all hands on deck. So in order to save another teacher, they pulled me from the line and told me to meet my dad on the balcony. My dad told me on the way up that they picked me because they knew if I fell down and broke my leg, that my family wouldn't sue them. The tower was filled with scrapped old metal from past repair that had piled up over a century. Plus, the wooden steps that led up had gaps that a stupid and small person could potentially go through. So, taking a goody two-shoes like me with their dad watching them was probably the right choice. If you are wondering why 2 people had to be present to operate the bell, you have to ring the bells and also stop them. If you didn't stop, the reverb, it would go on for too long. So 2 ropes hung from the ceiling at different points, 1 for each purpose. Similar to that stupid rust dissolver, we had a bit of time to wait until the bells were needed. For whatever reason, my dad was in a great mood. He let me walk up to the actual ceiling, which is crazy, as I think about it, as it wasn't even stairs that went up. Literal floorboards had been shoved into the side of the wall that you climbed up. It was awesome. On the way down, I had the ability to look on the other side of the pile of scrap metal, and noticed that a rectangular door was on the other side. My dad let me shimmy past them and open it up. It was the attic of the church. As I said, the first tower is the tallest, and the second is a little shorter. But the attic was the portion in between that was probably 1/2 as tall as the bell tower. It was very dark, but on the other side was a door with light outlining. I asked my dad to borrow his phone so I could use the flashlight on it. He tossed it to me and told me to keep track of time as I needed to be back in around 5 minutes to help with the bells. That sounds so bad for a parent to do, but I swear this was the only time I can remember my father being like this. Flashing the light around the room, it's made of 3 platforms with 2 large gaps in between. At the bottom of the gaps were wool insulation. I remember thinking I would probably live if I fell down. To the right of the door through was a few wooden planks nailed together. I picked it up and put it over the first gap before walking to the middle. Then I picked it up again to walk to the door on the other side. As you probably guessed, that door led to the other tower. When I opened it up, the room was yellow, old and deteriorated. I honestly didn't feel safe about stepping foot into the room because I was worried about whether or not the floor would collapse. But across that small room was a ladder leading up and a window that the light outline of the door was coming through. My dad shouted out for me to come back. I had spent so long getting across that the 5 minutes were almost up. I turned back and rushed across the planks, and I rang the bells with my dad before going back to class. I was remembering this when I thought to myself, why not go and see what was up that ladder? So, I went up, and after pushing some metal around, I managed to crouch down into that square door. When I turned on my phone's flashlight, I looked around me to see where the planks were. They were not near the door. I looked up and down the sides of the attic I was standing on and didn't see them. Flashing my light over to the other side, I managed to find them. They were placed so that you can move from the middle to the other tower. In my head, I was still contemplating this when the room became darker for just a second. A shadow had washed over the light that was coming from the door as I heard the sound of creaking wood. It took me a second, but I realized what that meant. Someone was in the room and had walked across, blocking the window. Rushing back to the balcony, I decided to wait for my 30 minutes to end by staring at the bottom of that staircase, hoping that some old janitor would eventually walk down. They didn't. Instead, nobody came down. The timer on my phone went off, and working as fast as I could, I wire brushed the metal legs till they shined. During that time, I had convinced myself that whoever was in that room was probably a janitor and was just as curious as me as to what was up there. So, after I calmed down a bit, I went back up and called out to see if someone would respond. I heard nothing. As I stepped into that square door, my feet immediately stepped onto something. The planks were back on this side. I would have sworn to you that nobody could have possibly come down without me hearing or noticing. My curiosity was higher than ever, so I picked up the planks and made my way across. When I opened the door, I saw that the old yellow floor I remembered had caved in. No ladder existed. Whatever room it led to had gone with the floor. Looking down, it simply went into the top of some square white ceiling tiles at the bottom. I stared stupidly into the void and thought. Whatever did block the light wasn't in the room and walked across the window. They walked across the door on this side. Just as I realized, I heard the door slam on the other side, and the sound of rushing feet on old wood. The sounds became slowly quieter as I stood still. A few minutes passed before I managed to breathe again. I don't know who is up there, or why they didn't say anything when I was visible the entire time. When I looked around more in the attic on the way out, I was expecting to find a pile of cans or trash or something to indicate it was a squatter. But the room was empty. The only thing not bolted down was the plank to cross. Attempting to not make it obvious I had been in the attic, I brought up if anything big needed to be repaired while I was gone at college. Eventually, with enough steering, my mom mentioned that the other tower had collapsed on itself during the short while I was at college. Luckily enough, it was only the wooden floors that had rotted through, and the walls were solid enough that they just tossed it all away and put up a new ceiling in the deacon's quarters where the debris had fallen into. I don't want to bring this up with my family because I know they would think I was drinking again. But whoever, or whatever that was, can't just be allowed to stay up there. Plus, odds are during the 2 times I was in that attic, they know what I look like. I don't want to have to worry about some psycho following me from church one day, so they don't get ratted out. If you have any ideas, let me know. I'm open to anything. I work at a funeral home, and a body keeps showing up in the wrong drawer. By Aaron is Not Funny, and you're listening to Creepypasta. I've been keeping track of the strange things that happen at the funeral home. Mostly because I realized a few months into the job that if I didn't start writing them down, I would either forget the details or convince myself that none of it had actually happened. I told myself that this would help, that writing the occurrences down would make sense of them, or at least allow me to sleep at night, but the truth is that writing only seems to remind me of how little I actually understand this place. Last week, something happened that unsettled me more than anything I've experienced so far, and I know I need to share it before I lose track of the details. This one started last week with a body that was, in every possible way, completely ordinary. The body arrived late in the evening, unremarkable in every way. Normal age, ordinary cause of death, regular paperwork. Nothing about him stood out to me when we moved him onto the operating table, except for the way that his arm shifted slightly when we adjusted the sheet, which I told myself was just residual movement, the kind you read about in training but don't really expect to see. Martin didn't comment on it, so I didn't either. We tagged him, logged him, and placed him in the refrigeration unit like we always do. The same one we've used since I started here, sliding the drawer closed into the seal caught with that familiar, slightly hollow sound that echoes more than it should in a room that small. I remember checking the label twice before I left. Not because anything seemed wrong, but because I had gotten into the habit of double-checking things after what happened with Daniel Crow. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual, hardly out of habit and hardly because sleep has become a little more difficult since I started working here. After unlocking the front door and setting my things down in the office, I made my way back to the preparation room with the vague intention of getting a head start on the day's work before anyone else came in. The drawer was closed. That was the first thing I noticed. And for a moment it felt reassuring because it meant whatever I had expected to find, though I couldn't have said exactly what that was, hadn't happened. Then I opened it. It was empty. I froze, staring at the other drawers, my mind racing for a rational explanation. Maybe a janitor's mistake? Martin moving it temporarily, or a misread label? I stood there for several seconds looking at where the body should have been, trying to fit what I was seeing into something that made sense. There are only so many explanations for something like that, and all of them rely on the assumption that something ordinary has gone wrong in a way that can eventually be corrected. I checked the label again, even though I already knew it was the right drawer, and then I started opening the others. I went one by one, moving down the row more quickly than I probably should have, though I was still careful enough to make sure I wasn't overlooking something obvious in my haste. I found him 4 drawers over, positioned exactly as we had left him. Sheet pulled up neatly, tag still in place. There was nothing to suggest anything had changed, except for the fact that he was no longer where he was supposed to be. I closed the drawer, paused, and then opened it again, just to confirm that I hadn't made a mistake. He remained where he was. When I told Martin, he listened without interrupting, his expression neutral in a way that I've come to recognize as intentional. When I finished explaining what I had found, he simply told me to write it down, as though that was the most practical and reasonable response to the situation. Time, drawer. Anything else you notice? He said, already turning back to what he had been doing, which left me with the impression that this was not the first time something like this had happened, even if this was the first time I had been the one to notice it. The rest of the day was uneventful, and that night before I left, I checked the drawer again. I decided to let him stay in the drawer he was in when I came in that morning, but then, without really thinking about why, I marked the outside of the drawer. I pulled off a short piece of masking tape from the roll and stuck it over where the top of the drawer the body was, connected to the bottom edge of the drawer above it. That night, I went home with a small pit in my stomach, though I wasn't sure if I could explain exactly why. I knew that the body had freaked me out, but could I really convince myself, or anyone else, that the body had moved on its own during the night? I was one of the last ones to leave in the night, and I was the first to get there in the morning. Though any efforts I had put into easing my worries in the night were immediately undone the following morning. When I came to work the next morning, I skipped out on my normal morning routine and went straight downstairs to storage. To my relief, the drawer was still closed, but on further inspection, any hope I was feeling that I had imagined the events of yesterday left as soon as they had come. The mark was broken. The tape wasn't torn, but it had clearly been moved. It looked like someone peeled the tape off of the drawer, opened it, closed it again, and tried to press the tape back down to where it was before. I could tell that the tape had been removed because it was slightly creased and had a tiny dog ear fold at the top corner. And when I put my face closer to the tape, really trying to remember if I had just done a bad job at taping it shut yesterday, I could swear I saw a fingerprint on the tape. I remember feeling something settle in my chest at that point. Not panic exactly, but a certainty that whatever was happening was not the result of a mistake I could correct by being more careful. I steeled myself with a nervous, shaky breath, and I opened the drawer. It was empty, but this time I didn't hesitate. I moved through the others until I found him again, farther down, and positioned slightly differently than before. One arm dangled at just enough of an angle that I was certain it hadn't been the night before. Over the next few days, I documented everything. Not just the drawer numbers and the times, but the order I checked them in, the placement of the tools on the cart, the way the condensation formed along the inside of the unit doors, even the faint variations in the sounds of the refrigeration unit inside of the unit doors. Because the more I paid attention, the more it felt like the movement wasn't random. On the fourth night, I stayed late. I told Martin I had paperwork to finish, which was partially true, but I mostly wanted to see if anything would happen when I was there. Up until this point, all of the changes had occurred overnight, in that stretch of time where no one was watching. The building felt different at night, quieter in a way that seemed heavier rather than empty, like the absence of sound was itself something that had settled into the walls and floors. And when I stepped into the preparation room, I had the distinct feeling that I was interrupting something, though I couldn't have said what. The drawer was closed when I approached it, the metal handle colder than usual beneath my fingers. For a moment, I found myself hesitating, aware that this no longer felt like a routine action, but something closer to a confirmation of what I already suspected I would find. When I finally pulled it open, he was there, positioned exactly where I left him. The sheet was still drawn neatly over him, the tag still in place, and nothing at all to suggest that anything had changed. That should have felt reassuring, though it wasn't, because by that point the absence of change felt just as deliberate as the movements had. I stood there longer than I meant to, watching, listening, aware of the low, steady vibration of the unit beneath my hand, and the way the room seemed to hold its silence in a way that felt almost expectant, like it was waiting for something that hadn't happened yet. Eventually, I closed the drawer again, pressing it firmly until I felt the seal catch, and turned toward the door, already reaching for the light switch. I had all intentions of leaving, because there is a point where staying any longer stops feeling like observation and starts feeling like participation. And I was not sure which side of that line I was standing on anymore. Then, with my hand hovering just a foot or two from the switch, the lights went out. For a brief moment, the room existed only in the dim spill of light from the hallway behind me, enough to outline the edges of the counters and the shape of the refrigeration unit against the wall. It was enough light to barely see, but not enough to fill in the details. And it was in that in-between space, where nothing was fully visible, but nothing was entirely hidden either, that I heard it. It was not loud, and it was not sudden. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like the careful shifting of weight across a surface. That kind of sound does not belong to machinery or settling buildings, but to something that is choosing to move. I did not turn immediately. Instead, I stood there with my hand still held up near the light switch, aware of the way the silence around the room seemed to deepen. I held my breath, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up one by one. Finally, a chill ran up my spine, and I worked up all of the courage I had left. When I turned back towards the unit, the drawer was open. Not partially, not slightly misaligned in a way that could be explained later, but fully extended with the metal track visible beneath it. The interior exposed in a way that made it immediately clear that it had not been left that way by accident. For a moment, I thought it was empty again. Then I realized I was looking at it from the wrong angle. It had been moved forward. Not dramatically, but enough that the sheet rested closer to the edge than it had before, the fabric catching lightly on the lip of the drawer as though it had been pushed off in that direction rather than placed there. I did not step closer. I did not reach out. I simply stood where I was, aware of the distance between us in a way that felt significant, as though it was something that could change without warning. After a few seconds that felt longer than they should have, I took a step back. I jumped when I was met with a clanging sound that echoed in the small room. The drawer didn't jerk or slide abruptly, but moved outwards in a small movement that caused it to extend out fully and collide with the end of the track. It stopped moving as soon as I did, as I froze in the middle of my backward step, startled by the sudden sound. I felt something shift in my understanding then, because up until that moment, I had been treating the movement as something separate from me, something that occurred independently and could be observed from a distance. I stepped back again, slower this time. The drawer followed, clanging into the edge of the track again. It wasn't by the same distance, but it was enough to make it clear that the relationship between my movement and its own was not coincidental. I stopped. It stopped. The room felt smaller then. Not physically, but in a way that made the space between us seem less reliable than it had before. Like it could close without any warning if I wasn't careful. I do not remember deciding to leave for the night, only that at some point I was no longer in the room, the light still off behind me, and the door closing with more force than I intended, the sound of it settling into the wooden frame louder than it should have been in the quiet hallway. I stood there for a moment, listening, half expecting to hear something from the other side of the door. Maybe another shift, another movement, something that would confirm that it had not stopped simply because I wasn't looking at it anymore. There was nothing. The silence returned, steady and unbroken, as though the room had arrested itself the moment I stepped out of it. And the next morning, when I returned to work like I always do, the drawer was closed. I stood in front of it for longer than I should have, my hand resting lightly on the handle, aware of the faint vibration beneath my fingers and the way it felt like it went straight through to my bones. My hesitation had become more pronounced than it had even last night, some part of me already understanding that opening it was no longer just a matter of confirming what could have changed, but acknowledging that it would. When I did finally pull it open, it was empty. I did not check the others right away. Instead, I turned, already aware of where my attention was being drawn, and found him on the preparation table. He was positioned neatly, the sheet folded back just slightly enough to expose his face to the overhead light. There was something different about him then, something subtle enough that I might not have noticed if I hadn't already been looking for changes, because his head had shifted just enough that it was no longer angled up in that familiar neutral position. His head was turned slightly towards the door, toward the space where I stood. I remained where I was, aware of the distance between us, aware of the stillness of the room, and aware of the uncomfortable certainty that whatever had been happening over the past few days was no longer contained to a pattern that I could observe and record without consequence. I stepped back into the hallway and closed the door, leaving everything exactly as it was. I went home earlier than usual that day, taking the same route I always take through town. The sidewalks mostly empty, the fog still lingering in the spaces between buildings where the streetlights don't quite reach. And for a while, the walk felt no different than it ever had. the sound of my footsteps steady against the pavement, the quiet of the town settling in around me in that familiar, muted way. It wasn't until several minutes had passed that I became aware of a second rhythm beneath my own, faint enough that I could have dismissed it as an echo or a trick of the way sound carries in the fog, but consistent enough that I could not ignore it once I had noticed it. I slowed, not abruptly, but gradually, paying closer attention to the spacing of my steps. I heard the way each one landed and lifted, and the sound behind me that adjusted with it. Not perfectly, not in a way that mirrored me exactly, but in a way that suggested awareness rather than a coincidence. When I came to a stop, the sound behind me did the same. Not immediately, but after a slight delay, as though whatever was making it needed an extra moment to register the change. I did not turn right away. Instead, I stood there listening, aware of the quiet pressing in on all sides, aware of how little there was to mask the sound if it chose to return. And when I finally looked back, there was nothing there. The sidewalk stretched empty behind me, the fog softening the edges of everything softly, until the distance became difficult to judge. For a moment, I considered the possibility that I had imagined it entirely, that the pattern I thought I had heard was nothing more than my own steps reflected back at me in a way I had misinterpreted. Then I started walking again, and after a few seconds, the second rhythm returned. Faint, measured, following. I have been writing it down even more consistently since then. Every detail, every change, every small inconsistency that refuses to settle into something I can explain, because it feels increasingly important that I keep track of where things are supposed to be, even if that understanding only lasts until the next time I look. But I have stopped trying to move him, and I have started paying attention to the spaces outside of the funeral home, because I can no longer ignore the possibility that whatever has been shifting inside that room might not be confined to it, and that the distance between where it is and where I am may not be as fixed as I once believed it to be. We built a 4-dimensional house. Shouldn't have walked on the roof. By Rowan Redfang, and welcome to Creepypasta. Architects are artists who tell space how to behave. We are taught from day one to respect the ground. We spend our lives fighting stress and begging gravity to let our work stand. Dahlia and I instead spent the last decade figuring out how to insult all of that. Because for thousands of years, humanity had been unaware that they were only building on the surface of the universe. The mountain wind bit through my coat with the scent of electric fumes and pine trees. I stood at the edge of the concrete platform behind a blast-resistant glass shield. The clearing around us was a crater we had ripped out of the forest, made of dirt and gravel, hidden between the Alps. General Hansen's squad had butchered over 40 acres of ancient pine to clear the perimeter. Dahlia stood beside me, her fingers tapping on her tablet. It glowed across her face and highlighted the exhaustion under her eyes. She hadn't slept in almost 48 hours, and neither had I. We didn't need coffee. Adrenaline running through our veins made even the cold wind irrelevant. I couldn't take my eyes off our life's work, what we had sacrificed our 30s for. Swimming through the pre-dawn mist on the concrete foundation was our monument to insanity. 8 individual cubes, each measuring 40 feet across, made from high-density polymers, tungsten, and steel. 4 of them were stacked vertically into a tower. The remaining 4 extended outwards from the 3rd floor, branching in all 4 directions, like a cross, or what it actually was, an unwrapped tesseract. The structure offended the natural landscape of the mountain. All around it was my wife Dahlia's contribution to my genius, the GFA, Gravitational Fulder Array, a ring of 12 superconducting pillars and black towers connected by cables filled with liquid helium to prevent overheating. And all those armed soldiers surrounding the structure were completely unaware that their rifles would be useless against mathematics. They kept shifting their weights in the cold. Pressure across the primary nodes is stabilizing. Generators are at a maximum capacity, Dahlia said, with that melody in her voice, like every time the numbers finally made sense. She tucked a lock of her dark hair behind her ear. She went on. We need the structural integrity to hold, Johann. The GFA is going to peak at almost 400 G inside the ring. If it buckles under the pressure, we're going to create a localized micro-black hole instead of folding the building. My work is fine, Dahlia, I said. I made sure to over-engineer the load by a factor of 5. I couldn't help but grin as I traced the lines of the building against the rising sun. We're about to force the universe to accept our new reality. A Nobel Prize awaits you, and the Pritzker for me. I chuckled. They'll have to invent new categories of awards after this. The gravel behind us crunched under heavy boots approaching. General Hansen stepped into the light, flanked by 2 soldiers and their rifles. He wore a parka over his uniform, exhaling clouds with each breath. From the look on his bearded face, I could tell he considered joy to be a tactical disadvantage. I couldn't remember ever seeing him smile. Aren't you planning your award ceremonies too early, Dr. Johann? He said, with that thick German accent. We've been freezing here for weeks now. I'm looking at 8 very expensive plastic boxes. Tell me you're not going to actually crush them. Explain to me again what we're buying before I choose to freeze the money instead of my men. I turned, ready to fend off his skepticism. To think that Dahlia and I were the only people in the world who understood the punchline to the greatest joke ever told to science. Imagine you take a cardboard box and put it in a hydraulic press, I said, gesturing at the structure. What happens? You flatten the box, the general said. Indeed, it doesn't disappear. All the material is still there, just folded into a lower dimension. It becomes a square, from a 3D object to a 2D. I understand how a trash compactor works, Doctor, and I don't like the thought of flattening 50 million euros of NATO funding. We're not crushing anything, I said, unable to keep that electric excitement out of my voice. I was shaking. We just compress a dimension. According to our calculations, the other 7 cubes will compress into the exact same coordinates as the first one without intersecting. They will overlap quantum mechanically. It's topology, Dahlia intervened. Her voice was the perfect counter to mine, calm and precise. The GFA generates a localized gravity well, so intense it will bend spatial dimensions inwards. It will project the building into a higher dimensional space and leave only a 3D cross-section behind. Hansen took a sip from his thermos, shifting his gaze up to my beautiful building. So, like a pocket dimension? You're telling me you can fit an entire base inside a closet? Yes, kind of, I said, clapping once and pointing a finger at him. Imagine infinite space on a finite plot of land. It will revolutionize urban planning, architecture, and storage. Hansen interrupted me. Deployment. A bunker that can't be hit by missiles because the interior doesn't exist outside it. Do it then, Doctor. Let's see where our money went. Dahlia and I exchanged looks. A decade had passed. A decade of failed grants and scientific mockery, of sleepless nights and broken prototypes, all conveyed between us in a single glance. She nodded and tapped a sequence on her tablet. We all put our earmuffs on, our hands joined together on the safety switch mounted on the side of the console. Then we turned the key and pressed the interface. The earth shook when the GFA screamed like a giant beast. Its engines rumbled as massive amounts of power were released into the pillars, more than what could power an entire city. The air pressure dropped quickly and made our ears ring. A frequency followed that hit my chest and made my bones rattle and my teeth ache. The reaction assaulted our biology rather than our eyes. There was no flash of light or laser beams. It all happened just like in our simulation. The space between the pillars boiled, and the air turned into a violent but warm storm that melted the snow around them. I couldn't take my eyes off the building. Lights bent all around it, following geometric arcs that were impossible to predict. Gravitational lensing. That was the name. Like the light of a star passing behind a black hole. Even space itself warped, behaving like air above a jet plane. Gravity was pulling it inwards. All the steel stretched into a translucent distortion, slowly bleeding into the cube beneath. I tasted blood in my mouth, but I ignored it. We knew it would happen. Completely mesmerized, I watched the solid matter fold onto itself. The 4 cubes flanking the 3rd floor collapsed inwards through the center, drawn by the crushing gravity. The architecture was literally recalculating itself, folding angles that our brain could never process. And behind the building, the sky appeared to fracture into thousands of shapes, turning the visual into an ever-shifting mosaic of static. Geometry was melting, liquefying and sliding through the metal. We stared at the matter collapsing towards the central point, but at the same time remaining in the same place. The absurdity of the view made my stomach turn. I gagged, but forced my eyes to stay open. The scream reached its peak with a vibration that almost shattered the glass. With a shock wave of air that slammed dirt and leaves across it, the noise vanished. A perfect silence fell onto the entire mountain. When the ringing in my ears faded, I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead, and just then I noticed my nose was bleeding. Dahlia also had a thin line of blood on her lips, and so did Hansen and his soldiers. They moaned, holding their temples. I raised my gaze and looked past the cracked glass. The mist had disappeared, and not just that. My God, I whispered. My towering cross of 8 cubes was gone. In the center of the concrete platform in the ring of black pillars sat a single cube. Just the ground floor. Hansen stepped forward with a face of shock that spoke for itself. "What happened?" he yelled. "Where's the rest of it? Did it disintegrate? You told me you were going to compress it, Doctor. Did you just destroy years of work?" I ignored him and stared, my palms and face pressing against the glass. "Dahlia, the telemetry?" "It's stable," she said, out of breath. Her fingers tapped across the tablet. "It's there. The mass readings on the platform haven't changed at all. It's still supporting the same weight as before. The spatial overlapping is holding. The W-axis compression is at 100%. She smiled at me, and so did I. The hypervolume folded successfully. "It worked," I said, trying to catch my breath. "It's all inside." Dahlia slammed into me. My legs were giving out, but my hands, still shaking, wrapped around her coat and held her tight. I buried my face into her shoulder with tears wetting the fabric. We hugged, ignoring the soldiers and the freezing wind returning. Like two people who'd spent the last 10 years digging a tunnel out of a prison, and finally found freedom. "Where did the other floors go?" the general asked. "It's all there," I said. "We just can't see the other 7 rooms because our eyes are locked into 3 dimensions. We're just looking at a single face of it." "Radiation levels are negligible," Dahlia reported, her eyes darting between her tablet and the single cube. "Gravity is normalized. Atmosphere is standard." We walked across the dirt towards the perimeter of the platform. Hansen followed us, flanked by his soldiers, their faces paled in confusion. From that angle, the cube looked completely normal. Just a gray box of brutalist architecture with a door on the front and windows on the sides. "So?" the general said with a gesture towards the cube. "Can we walk inside?" "Not yet," I answered. I was about to continue when I took a few steps to the right to get a better angle of the structure. And the magic happened. As my perspective shifted, the cube reacted. It moved. The front face containing the door contracted inwards and flattened into a sheet of light. At the same time, the left wall unfolded outwards to replace it. The door became a ghostly image that lingered for a second before bleeding and vanishing. It slid back into the center and became translucent, while a blank panel folded out from the opposite side. I stopped dead and watched in awe. "My God," the general said. "What the hell is that?" one of the soldiers yelled, aiming his rifle at the cube. "Do not shoot!" we both screamed. Hansen drew his own rifle, taking a step back. "Dr. Johann, the building is moving. You said it was stable. Why is it tracking us?" I could hear both Dahlia's heart and mine hammering in the silence. I sidestepped to the right, and the cube reacted instantly. The wall retracted into an impossible center, and the face with the door came back, pulled from the interior to face me again. Its motions were so fluid and sickening to watch. "It's not moving, and it's not tracking us," I said, taking ragged breaths. The knowledge hit me with massive force. Nothing is alive, General. It's just the projection. Speak English, Doctor, Hansen said without lowering his weapon. He's right. Dahlia stepped in front of him. Think of a normal 3D cube. If you look straight at it, you only see one face, a square. But if you walk around it, you see the other faces. What we're looking at is no longer a cube. This is a tesseract, a 4D hypercube. It possesses 8 cubical faces, but because it's now existing in a 3D space, it has to rotate its hypervolume to maintain continuity in our field of vision. It's not moving. Our movements are forcing its projection to recalculate. We can only perceive one cross-section at a time. Send the drone in, Hansen ordered. Nobody is stepping inside a building that can't decide what shape it is. A soldier carried a large drone. He set it on the concrete and stepped back. The front door of the cube could be opened via remote control. Dahlia tapped on her tablet and, with an echoing screech, the door swung open. Inside, the lights were on. The interior looked just like before. Sterile walls and a table bolted to the floor. In the corner, the staircase leading to the second floor. The drone rolled on the concrete and crossed the threshold of the cube. We all gathered around the monitor of the soldier handling it. The camera feed showed a perfectly normal view. The lighting was fine. The table showed no visible changes. Upstairs, I said, as we all stared in silence. Make it proceed upstairs. The soldier nodded. The drone rolled towards the staircase and raised its mechanical legs to begin a slow climb. None of us dared make a sound. We stopped breathing as the images appeared on the monitor. The drone reached the top of the stairs and rolled onto the second floor. I don't understand, Hansen said. He pointed a finger at the screen. The drone is going up, but there's no second floor there. Where is it going? Because it worked. The internal volume is maintained. The second floor exists within the folded dimension, Dahlia replied. He didn't answer. The drone reached the second floor, transmitting footage of the room and its pristine walls and window. Hansen was no longer looking at the monitor. I followed his gaze. So did Dahlia, her face paling. Hovering over the cube, directly above the center, was the drone. Instead of flying, it stood there, existing in a space that our eyes couldn't understand. Its shape stretched and twisted to infinity like a graphic glitch. It folded open, showing the internal wiring and circuits, all the gears and treads, the camera lens, everything occupying the same visual plane. We were looking at an autopsy of a robot floating above the cube. But the monitor still showed the images from the inside without issues. As it moved, the metal skeleton kept distorting into long spikes and snapping back into a cluster made of all its components. Inside the building, it was still navigating the second floor intact. It's moving through the W axis, I whispered. It's not broken, we're just seeing the light escaping the folding. That's its cross-section passing through our dimension. That's fascinating. The view was horrifying, but it was also the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. We'd done it. "General, prepare the suits," I said. "We're going in." 2 of the last 10 years went into designing those, just for this moment. Thick shells over a flexible membrane, with an exterior of layered polymer that caught the sunlight. The helmet sealed at the neck with a pressurized collar. The 4 security locks clicked, one at a time. We looked like something between deep-sea divers and astronaut. "Dr. Johann, you want me to put this on while my men are securing the perimeter in winter clothes?" Hansen said, pulling at the gloves of his suit. "This feels a bit excessive." "If you prefer to walk in without one," Dahlia intervened, "be our guest, General." "You said the building is stable." "Indeed it is," I said, working the zipper on my torso. "But we're not. Our bodies are still 3D. That stops being trivial when we cross that." I pointed towards the cube. "The GFA compressed the volume across a W-axis that we don't possess a sensory organ for. If we walk in there without protection, every cell in our bodies will be trying to occupy the same coordinates as themselves. Our organs would unfold outside of them." The General didn't answer. Dahlia finished the explanation. "The suits enforce boundary conditions. They keep our body's location consistent. In short, they will tell the universe that we are still 3-dimensional in a very angry way." Hansen grunted, looking unhappy with the explanation, but he put on the helmet. The suits were wired, 4 cameras each, 1 in each direction, and microphones. The soldiers outside would have a live feed, or so we thought. Dahlia had done the math on what happened to electromagnetic signals when they crossed a dimensional edge, but we chose not to share that with the General yet. He grabbed his rifle and led the way. We crossed the platform. 3 people who had run out of things to say. The cube sat there in the center of the ring of pillars, like something people would worship. A puzzle waiting to be solved, or a warning begging to be heard. The mist had cleared, leaving behind a sky too blue and clear, like the world itself wanted to observe. Hansen walked in first, raising the rifle to shoulder height. To greet us was the most normal banality, just as all the times we'd gone in before. The walls, the table. On the opposite side, a window showed the mountains and the line of pines. The sunlight came from the distance and formed a yellow glowing square on the floor. Nothing told us we were navigating a hyper-volume. "Smells like a construction site," Hansen said. Dahlia's helmet shook slowly. "No, it doesn't. We can't perceive smells through the suit. It's a phantom sensation." She checked the reading on her tablet. "Atmosphere is standard. Oxygen at 21%. Gravity is 9.81. She glanced towards the window. "Visual from outside is undistorted." "Of course," I said. "We're still in the 3D section." The drone sat at the top of the staircase where it had stopped, intact. Its light blinked green and steady. Might have sounded silly, but I felt affection for it. It went in first and came back fine. The first human-made object to step in a 4D space. A hero robot. Humanity would remember it like the first man on the moon. I smiled. The staircase ended in a square hole in the ceiling. The normalcy in our footsteps' noise made cold sweat run behind my neck. Hansen swept the barrel of his rifle across the room as he approached the staircase. "Keep a tight formation." "General, there are no living entities in this structure," Dahlia said, following. "Furthermore, your weapon is about to experience some unfolding. I suggest you leave it downstairs." Hansen ignored her. His helmet pointed up, eyes locked on the top as he climbed the first step. We followed close behind, boots echoing in the narrow space. Each step felt too ordinary, and for that reason, my teeth couldn't stop chattering. We moved at a snail's pace. It took a lifetime to reach the top. When we stepped onto the second floor, none of us moved or said anything. Hansen stood with both hands at his sides and his rifle down. I watched him, trying to understand that there was indeed a second floor, that it existed, had walls and a floor and lights and windows, and that his rifle was no longer a rifle. It had unfolded, just as Dahlia and I predicted, just like our bodies would have done without the suits. In the same way a book opens, but on its own. The barrel extended, flattened, and at the same time curved into itself. The body peeled along an axis that our brains couldn't comprehend. Everything spread outwards into an arrangement of components that were still connected, but pointed everywhere and nowhere, like a schematic. Hansen dropped it and stepped back. It became a smear of its own components and settled into a tangle of metal and plastic. The thud bounced off interconnecting walls. Hansen yelled, "What the hell is that? You said it would break!" "We said it would unfold," Dahlia clarified. "That's the accurate term." "There's no reason it should do that." "Oh, there's every reason for it to do that," I said. The conversation died when we raised our gazes. The room had done the same thing the rifle did, but in a larger way. Facing me was the north wall, or what I thought was the north wall. It occupied the same space in which the floor should have been, and both surfaces were visible. Below us, no, not below, through us, the first floor was visible without a gap, but through what I called an overlap. The window was on the east wall, but also on the south wall. It showed the outside, a band of compressed images along the edge of my vision. Trees and concrete stretched and compressed like crumpled balls of paper. The nausea came back stronger when I looked around. I was about to throw up. The walls were transparent. I was viewing the first floor from an angle that shouldn't exist. Our little hero, the drone, sat there, all its internal body stretched into a glitch, its anatomy looping endlessly. "If we had walked in without these suits," Hansen muttered. "Instantaneous death," Dahlia answered. "Our topology would have attempted to recalculate to fit the 4D space," I added. "All our organs and skin and bones and veins. They would." "That's enough, Dr. Johann. I got it." Hansen walked towards the window with careful steps over a floor that intersected with the world below. He tried to communicate with his soldiers, but was met only with static noise. "Oh, we expected that," I said. "Radio waves in a 4D space propagate in a hypersphere rather than a sphere. In a folded environment, the propagation path doesn't end where the receiver is. The signal has nowhere to arrive. Think of it like trying to deliver a package to an address that exists on every road on the planet. So we're isolated. We've always been, Dahlia said, with no worry in her voice. We just couldn't prove it until now. The light shifted. The entire room darkened. I caught something at the edge of the window. Darkness, like a shadow moving. It crossed the mountains and the structure, and it was gone in a second. Could it have been a cloud? It made sense. The sunlight traveled inside the building, after all. Did you see that? Hansen asked. Gravitational glitch, probably, I answered. With the GFA bending the space, visual artifacts are to be expected. We climbed to the 3rd floor. It required concentration. The distortion made the distance between the steps impossible to understand. When we reached the top, my obsession peaked. The only way to describe the floor was a theorem. As we came up suddenly, there were 5 rooms, and none of them had a door or even a wall between them and us. The corridor, walls, bathroom, the bedrooms, and the studio we'd built around the middle room, all were accessible at the same time. Their interiors folded open. The porcelain of the bathtub intersected with the mattress of the bedroom. Studio desks floated inside closets. This is unreal, Hansen commented, spinning once. It's real, Dahlia whispered, and spectacular. To a 3-dimensional observer watching from outside, we must be teleporting, I said. If we walked to the studio, we'd just appear there. Dahlia crouched beside the bathroom wall, which was also every other room's wall and also the floor. I watched as her hand reached into the bedroom, moving through nothing, where the walls unfolded. She lifted a pen from the desk, and it came back to her hand, unfolding itself like everything else. Did you just grab that through the wall? Hansen said. Object retrieval across boundaries with no physical transit, she said, holding the twisting thing up. Technically, there is no wall, I said. The 5 rooms share 3D space, so their surface distributed into the available geometry. Imagine a house drawn on paper, all flat. A 2D person living inside, the drawing must move through its doors because the walls are impassable. But for you, looking down at the page, everything can be reached without touching a single door. The walls can't stop you because you are approaching from an axis that doesn't exist for the second person. That's us, right now. We are standing above the page. I should stop asking questions, Hansen said. There was a table in the studio, which we'd put as a simulated habitation test, and from the higher dimension I could see the top and the bottom at the same time. I could see inside the drawers. Dahlia ran her measurements again. Atmosphere still standard and gravity at 9.6. Interesting. A small deviation, but not alarming. Radiation increased slightly, but still way below dangerous levels. As the general inspected the floor, attempting to pick up objects through walls, we collected data, talking and comparing numbers. And so, we heard it. First came a vibration. A frequency that our microphones caught before our ears did. It rose into a moan, deep and uneven, something that didn't fit any scale we could identify. The closest thing I could compare it to was a whale's lament, but it came from above. At the same moment, the light dropped again. This time, all the rooms darkened for several seconds, as if something was passing between the sun and us. Can visual artifacts make noise, Dr. Johann? Hansen said. We don't know, Dahlia answered, and I knew her too well to see how much those words hurt her to say. The readings are normal. Nothing spiked during that. No pressure change, no radiation anomaly. Nothing. It might be dimensional resonance, I said. In a folded space, the geometry is touching the adjacent regions. Sound might behave differently. Instead of propagating through a medium, it goes through the shape of space itself, and the shape of space here is... I gestured, unsure of what to say. I don't know. Maybe an acoustic artifact from the fold itself. From the fold? Hansen echoed. Like an echo, from the shape of the room instead of the room. The staircase to the last floor felt steeper, harder to climb. We didn't need the readings to notice the air was different, heavier, holding a certain resistance, the same way air feels before a huge storm. When the pressure drops and the body knows before the eyes see it. Our suits register the change. Gravity is at 8.8. We've lost over 10%. Dahlia held her tablet up. Radiation went up 40%. Still within safe levels, but it spiked. Pressure is down 8%. She turned to face me. Johann, this wasn't in our simulations. Is that a problem? Hansen asked. I wanted to tell him no, that everything was fine. It means the fold here is affecting more than the physical geometry. There might be let's call it a battle between the compression and the gravitational field we hadn't accounted for. Will the suits hold? They will. They can hold more than this, Dahlia confirmed. We stepped towards the windows of the 4th floor, and outside, the world had broken. It had set a huge fuck you to perspective. It took me a minute to understand what I was looking at. The soldiers down there, all of them, I could see every single one, were visible in their entirety. No, not through their clothes or skin. Through everything. Their full architecture flattened in the same space as their bodies. Muscle stretched over bones, opened like a blueprint. Their lungs pulsed with each breath, and the blood traveled through arteries across the whole body. They walked around and talked to each other, unaware we were looking at them from a dimension they couldn't see. To another person, it must have been horrifying. To me, it was the most intimate thing I'd ever seen. My men! Hansen yelled when he looked out. They're fine, General, I said. From their position, nothing changed. We're just looking at them from above the page. Remember? They only look like that from up here. Hansen stepped back and didn't look again. Dahlia took her measurements as I photographed every overlapped surface. We checked every reading and talked to each other at a speed that made it sound like a foreign language to anyone who hadn't spent a decade on this project. I laughed when she made a joke, a good one that nobody else but the two of us could get. The last staircase loomed in front of us, ending in a metal door, the roof access, in the exact position where we'd built it. And that never sparked any particular interest in me, until that moment. The air was becoming too dense, and the gravity was playing unfunny jokes, but I wanted to do it. I had to. Observe the world in full tetradimensional space. I had to see what was on the other side. We have sufficient data, Dahlia said. We should head back. Her face through her helmet was something I couldn't read, for the first time since we'd met in middle school. We were both doing the calculation, but not the same one. We didn't come this far only to go back one step from the finish line, I said. We came this far to collect data, Johann, and we have enough. We've proved the hypervolume exists. The space is too volatile. But there's more above us. That's the problem. There could be too much above us. Hansen stepped between us, facing me. I'll say this. Whatever made that sound earlier came from up there. He pointed at the roof door. And my opinion about sounds I can't identify is to not walk towards them. It was an artifact. We're literally bending space-time. Oddities are to be expected. You said you didn't know what it was, Dr. Johann. I just don't know what category it belongs to. We've spent 10 years building this door, and I'm not refusing to open it now that it stands in front of me. I said, too loudly, stepping past both of them, and climbing the distorted steps 3 at a time. This is the paradigm shift. I am documenting the roof. They rushed, trying to stop me, but I grabbed the handle and pushed the door open. I stepped out, and the sky stepped in. Literally. I stood on the roof of a hypercube, right at the top of the dimensional boundary. The sky had become an intersection of all possible skies, with every point visible as a volume instead of a surface, coming from all directions at once. Its layers curved and looped around each other, through cloud formations existing in their full 3D shape instead of a flat ceiling. The atmosphere became an ocean of fractals with impossible geometry and colors that I'd never seen. And I could see time. Echoes of snow falling upwards, crossing the light of billions of different galaxies overlapping into a singularity. This is beautiful. Dahlia gasped behind me, mesmerized. Hansen said nothing. We all looked up in awe. We spread across the roof and walked around. The data kept coming in faster than we could process it. Electromagnetic fields, pressure, gravitational waves, an atmosphere at an altitude we were and were not. And in all that, I couldn't stop talking. I must have said the words Nobel Prize 10 times. We were going to rewrite all the basic principles of physics. No, of all science. We stood where nobody had ever stood before in the history of the universe, in the hypervolume of a folded dimension, and we looked at it from above the page. The building vibrated before our suits registered it, and the light changed again. This time we could see it clearly. The entire sky darkened from every direction at once, and we all knew this wasn't how darkness worked. This wasn't how anything worked. The sound came again, longer and louder. It came from inside the vibration, from above. We looked up just as it arrived. I had no idea what I was looking at. My brain tried its best to find logic in it, but the numbers were all wrong. The world was wrong. A surface, or better, a membrane, except it was neither. As we watched, it shifted. One moment there was a sheet of glistening material that moved with the typical irregularity of a living being. The next moment, it folded out into a shape my eyes couldn't process. Not just because of its instability. That valley of pulsing red mountains slid with calcified columns like the supports of the cathedral made of flesh and bone. It materialized out of nothing, spanning miles and miles, and faded into waterfalls of black fluid. The tissue sliced into the three-dimensional space, constantly warping and folding. On Dahlia's tablet, the gravitational readings did something we never expected. It dropped, faster and faster. 3, 2, 1. Then it reached 0. What happened next was wrong. It went against every law of physics. It dropped below 0. That minus sign before the number mocked our pathetic human brains. It had to be wrong. The device had to be broken. Negative gravity? What nonsense was that? Our feet left the roof. I had no time to be surprised, but enough to anchor myself on the roof door. The gravitational pull was no longer downward. My vision twisted and slowly rotated until the sky was below me, like an endless ocean, and the roof was now a ceiling. Hansen floated in the air. Both his hands grabbed my ankle. Below him, dangling over the 40 ocean, Dahlia clung to Hansen's belt, her boots kicking the empty space. "Johann!" she cried out. "Hansen, don't let go!" I shouted. As the pull intensified, the most horrifying hypothesis came to my mind. Whatever that thing passing through the three-dimensional space was, it must have been so massive that it possessed its own gravitational field. That's when I realized what we saw was only the 3D projection of something much, much larger. Just like a cube appeared as a square on a 2D surface, showing a fraction of its real size. How massive was that thing? I had no idea how to describe it. The shape in the sky below us kept changing and moving. The darkness had become absolute, like floating in open space. It covered everything. "Pull," Hansen said. "I am pulling." But neither of us moved, because there was nothing to move towards. The door was the only fixed point remaining. The entire building was shaking. The thing below us was still there, moving, passing, arriving and departing in every direction at once. Hansen's hand slipped from my ankle, and I managed to twist and grab him with one hand just in time. But the grip was weak. "The suits are failing," Dahlia shouted. The exoskeletons groaned and bent under the immense gravity. I'm slipping," Hansen said. I clenched my jaw so hard, tasting blood. The pull of that thing was astronomical, but this was no attack. Whatever it was, it didn't even acknowledge us. We were just ants, caught in the gravitational destruction of a passing god. 3 fingers, then 2. Hansen's hand slipped. I watched as they fell. The edges of their suits first flickered in the same way the drone had done from outside. Their bodies appeared to me in cross-section, and then in a section I had no name for. They stretched along the W axis. "Dahlia!" I screamed. They fell into the sky, plummeting towards the endless expanse of red and white. The 3D barriers of their bodies ceased to exist. They elongated into a loop of infinite ribbons made of cross-sections of their internal structures. Their limbs stretched for hundreds of feet down the void, like falling into a black hole. Among the unfolding structures, flattening and adding more colors to the sky, I saw their eyes, massive and distorted, staring up at me, and filled with such an agony that it broke my very soul. Their screams came through the comms, and after a second, they turned into a loud, electric static. When the light returned, my vision rotated again. Gravity slammed me on the roof floor and left me lying on the concrete with the 4D sky back above me. My shoulder broke with a sickening crack. I screamed, not from pain. I screamed until my throat burned and I choked. I dragged myself towards the stairs and rolled down. I stumbled blindly through the lower floor, crying. On the second floor, Hanson's rifle was still on the floor, unfolded. The drone continued its mapping. On the first floor, the world returned three-dimensional. A soldier caught me when I stepped outside. I burst through the front door and ripped the helmet off my head. Then I vomited bile and blood onto the concrete. I woke up to a hospital ceiling. Radiation, they told me. I'd been exposed to massive amounts that the suit failed to protect me from. They'd never stopped questioning me about what happened, but I hadn't managed to speak a single word. The doctors looked afraid of telling me the truth. Weeks, or a few days, most likely. That's how long I have left. I'm in a bed with a window that faces the city and the sky above it. An ordinary sky. A blue two-dimensional surface. I'm tired and my hands are cold. 10 years we spent building a door to somewhere nobody could have ever reached. We proved it was there, that we could go in and come back, or that at least I could. Once. And then pay the price from beyond the grave. I know Dahlia's not dead. I want to clarify this. Her suit didn't break last time I saw her. In higher dimensions, time is just another direction one can move. She must be stretching across eternity in a moment of biological unfolding that never ends. But she's up there, and I'm going to meet her soon. Who knows? Maybe all of us are going to very soon. Because just a moment ago, a sound echoed through the glass, coming from the sky. Deep and steady, like a whale's lament. Just when the light shifted and the room darkened for a second. That shift, when something passes between you and the light. It swam across the sky. I saw it, eclipsing the entire planet. A colossal section of glistening muscle and bone. Its shape changing and moving in every direction at once, bleeding from its higher dimension into ours. I'm sorry. I brought it here. I don't know when it's going to tear the sky open, but I know that the sirens won't even have time to start. I just hope I'll be gone before that. I Tried to Rush a Bonsai by Bilbo Cheated, and you're listening to Creepypasta. I think I have time to write this. Things have calmed down for now. I have my chair wedged against the door, just in case. There's tapping at the window. I'm on the second floor of my house, and there used to be no trees outside my window. I need to find a way out, and this message needs to get out so no one makes the same mistakes. We have to go back a few months for you to understand. I just moved to this new rental home. The only issue is that the landlord did not allow pets, which seemed criminal with the large fenced-in yard. I asked anyway. "No pets," he said. "I've been burned before." "What if I kept up the garden?" I asked. "Would that change anything?" "About the dog? No." "What about the rent?" He looked out at the yard like he was already disappointed with the job I would do. "Spring and summer only," he said. "That's when the yard will need work. If it starts looking like hell, the discount goes away." "Yes, sir." "Tools are in the basement." That should have been the end of it. Discounted rent and some yard work. But I still wanted something to scratch that itch. Bonsai was an option. I'd never really considered it before, but I went all in watching videos, reading forums, buying those expensive little pruners. I learned about wiring trunks, exposing roots, and shaping miniature trees over the years. That was the issue. Years. Most of it just waiting around, especially in the first couple of years. Decades pass before you have anything impressive. Some trees are relatively faster growing. I still wanted the satisfaction of growing the tree from a seed, but I just didn't have the patience for it. One night I decided to buy seeds. I had to go deep into Google to find non-sponsored links. I wanted seeds from a specialty vendor. On about page 9, I clicked on a site. I can't remember the name, but it had to do with accelerated seed stock and touted seeds that can produce mature-looking bonsai in months. The site looked old, with a white screen, grainy pictures, and blue links. I clicked on one photo link that looked like a Chinese elm. There were no Latin names that I recognized on the site. I am embarrassed by the price I ended up paying. The product had all 5-star reviews, so I was hopeful. One of the most peculiar details that I can remember is returns only accepted in original soil and original shipping container. I bought a packet of 3 for a discounted rate and never received a confirmation email. I got back on the site the next morning, and that listing was gone. I thought it was a scam and got a new debit card to be safe. 2 weeks passed, and I was surprised by a small but heavy box at my doorstep. The outer cardboard shipping box didn't seem to be postmarked, but I was too excited to care. The inner box was wooden and closed with a brass clasp. The inside was lined with a grayish-blue metal. At the top of the small container, there was an instruction card. Germination stock, 3. Use dehydrated soil puck, enclosed. Keep contained indoors. Do not overwater. Keep in a well-ventilated location. Do not allow root access beyond pot. Odd? Yes. But I laughed this off at the time as some branding gimmick. The seeds themselves were larger than I had expected, and I noticed they were warm when I planted them in a small pot in the corner of my den near the floor vent. After a week, I thought I'd been scammed. No growth. But one morning, I woke up to a small green stalk. Finally, one was successful. From there, things seemed normal but fast. Within a few weeks, it had a tiny trunk with a branching structure ready to be wired and shaped. I was so happy with the results so far, I wanted to leave a review, but I couldn't find the site. I was so pleased that I even started posting photos to show off the growth. My friends were impressed, and the internet thought I was either lying about the age or accusing me of buying it from a nursery. One commenter even suggested that I had misidentified the tree species. These accusations didn't make me angry. They made me proud of my work. It was worth every penny. Soon it was time for pruning to shape the limbs. I spent some time studying the tree before making my first cut. When I did, dark sap began to ooze from the wound. My mouth began to taste as if I had just swallowed my car keys. I hope it isn't diseased. I took all the precautions, I thought. I opened the pruners around the second branch. Before I could close them, another branch snapped across the back of my hand. It cut me like a bad paper cut. I told myself, maybe I bumped it and shifted the branches. Or maybe it's a draft. The AC just came on. I finally managed to prune it properly, but I was worried about the sap's smell. But it did its job and sealed up the wounds I caused, and by morning the tree had pushed out new buds from the pruned branches. A few weeks later, the tree had grown enough that I wanted to move it to a larger, nicer bonsai pot. Repotting would also let me expose part of the root system. I thought it would enhance the beauty of the tree. I could also use this to change to a premium bonsai soil mix. I was surprised by the weight of the pot. I had to use twice as much strength as I thought to even get it off the table. I almost dropped everything when I encountered more resistance. As I looked back, I noticed the thick, pale roots had grown through the drainage holes. As I tracked it, my eyes traced over to the air vent. The roots had gone between the grates and down into the vent. I didn't want to hurt the tree. Bonsai roots can be delicate and are vital to the health of the plant. I didn't want all of this to go to waste. I tried to gently tug it free, but it wouldn't budge. On a closer look, there was a network of pale roots snaking into the darkness of the ductwork. On the one hand, I could just leave it alone, but I want this in the new pot, and I can't have roots growing into the HVAC system. I decided to cut it, and when I did, the roots seemed to recoil, and the detached side fell into the ductwork. That sharp metal taste filled my mouth. And with that taken care of, the rest of the potting went well. The tree was in its new pot with its alabaster roots on display. It was absolutely beautiful. For a day or two, everything seemed fine. I noticed the cut root had grown out of the drainage hole of this new pot. It seemed to be growing toward the air vent again. I moved the pot away from the vent, but the next morning more roots had curved down the sides of the pot, heading in the same direction. I decided to trim these to keep everything in the pot. Overnight, the tree dropped leaves and looked less healthy. I felt guilty. I tried to rationalize that maybe it wasn't getting the ventilation it needed, and this was its way of meeting its needs. From there, little things began to happen that I didn't notice enough to care about. The den started to smell like soil, which I thought was due to the newly exposed roots. Then I started to find dust around the air vents in the house. And last month, my water bill spiked, which I thought was related to a tapping I had been hearing in the walls that my landlord refused to come check out. A couple of days ago, I had people over for a housewarming party. It was the first time most of my friends had seen the place. I cleaned more than I needed to and rotated the bonsai on the side table so that the light hit it just right. The trunk had thickened into this elegant curve, and the exposed roots wrapped over the stone it sat on like pale fingers. The leaves were glossy and dense. It looked like something ancient that I had inherited, and people noticed immediately. "Wait," Emily said, leaning over it with her drink in her hand. "Is this the same tree from your pictures?" "Yeah." "No, it isn't." "It is," I said proudly. "You planted this, 3 months ago?" Something like that." She looked at me like she had caught me in some lie, but that quickly turned to concern. "That's not normal." From the kitchen, somebody said the den smelled like a greenhouse. Someone else said it smelled like pennies. I pretended not to hear that. I haven't smelled anything in weeks. Mark wasn't a bad guy. He just makes mistakes when he is drunk. Toward the end of the night, he crouched in front of the bonsai with a beer in his hand and gave it a serious look. "This is fake," he said. I ignored him. "It looks fake," he said, louder. "That means it's doing well," I said, trying to dismiss him. "You bought a tiny plastic tree and invented a whole personality around it." He reached out and flicked one of the leaves, not hard, just enough to make it move. I stepped toward him before he even realized I was doing it. "Don't." The room went quiet. Mark held up both hands. Sorry. Didn't know you and Bonnie were serious." A few people laughed. I did too, because I needed him to move on. Then he tipped his beer toward the pot. "Banzai!" The whole room laughed as a little beer spilled over the rim and darkened the soil. "Mark!" I scolded automatically. He looked at the pot, then at me. "Relax, it's a tree." I feel stupid now, but I was angry. A protective kind of anger, like he had done something to hurt a family member. I got paper towels and dabbed at the soil while everyone moved on. Someone changed the music and the room loosened again. The rest of the night was normal. People drifted between the kitchen, the den, and the back patio. The weather was nice enough now to keep the back door open for a while. I had a cooler outside by the steps because my fridge was full. At some point, I remember Mark announcing he was going out to grab another drink, looking at Bonnie, and asking, "Want one, babe? Be right back." He went through the kitchen and out the back door and just didn't come back. Nobody noticed for a while. By midnight, the stragglers began to head out. Emily was the first one to ask, "Where's Mark?" I said, "He's probably left." His car is still here." His car was parked exactly where it had been, under the oak near the curb. His jacket was still hanging over one of my dining chairs. His keys were still in the key box I put out for guests. His phone was on the kitchen island, buzzing every few minutes with messages from the same group chat we were all in. That was when everyone sobered up. We searched the yard with our phone flashlight. We checked everywhere, even the stupid places you check when you know a grown man can't fit, but you check anyway. Someone suggested he got picked up. Someone else said maybe he walked off drunk. Eventually, someone called the police. They came, asked questions, looked around, and took notes. I told them he had gone outside for a beer and never came back. So the search focused outward. By the time everyone left, it was almost 5 in the morning. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after the last car pulled away. The bonsai sat in the den where I left it. The soil seemed even darker now than when the beer had been spilled. I let it be and went to bed. I woke up this morning and I found something green growing out of my kitchen sink. At first I thought it was a piece of spinach. When I looked longer, I saw 3 little shoots coming up through the drain. Thin, pale stems with tiny green leaves at the end. They leaned toward the window over the sink. I touched one with a fork. It bent away from the metal. I dropped the fork into the sink as I jumped backwards. That was when I remembered the card from the box. Do not allow root access beyond pot. I thought that meant the roots might make it harder to repot without damaging the plant. I grabbed the drain cleaner from under the sink, and I poured until the chemical smell burned my nose and the little green shoots disappeared under the liquid. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, all at once, pipes knocked all around me, and I thought the house would split in half. A violent and deep metallic banging from inside the wall behind the sink traveled under the floor, then somewhere toward the den. I stepped back as the drain hissed, and the whole counter trembled. Something below me made a low, shifting sound, like furniture being dragged across a room. From the den came a dry rustling of leaves, 1,000 tiny movements layered on top of one another, like the tree was shivering. As quickly as it had started, the house went quiet, and I stood there with the empty bottle in my hand. I thought I had fixed it. I poured boiling water down after it, hoping it would wash out the chemicals from my pipes. I went into the den and saw that the bonsai had outgrown its wire. The training wire I had wrapped so carefully around the trunk to shape it was embedded halfway into the bark. The trunk had thickened around it in minutes. The bark bulged around each turn like a ring around a swollen finger. The leaves looked wet, glossy, and full. New roots had spilled over the side of the pot and touched the floor. One of them had reached the vent again. A new one had stretched in the opposite direction toward the kitchen. I stood in the doorway and tasted metal. I hadn't poisoned it. I fed it. That was when I finally understood what should have been obvious from the beginning. I needed to kill it. I'd only been to the basement a handful of times for the breaker box, but I never took stock of the equipment in the far corner. The familiar smell I had become accustomed to was strong in the basement. As I scanned my flashlight across the room, I did not see any roots or branches. I searched the pile. Just a weed whacker, garden shears, shovel, and a machete. I bent over and took the machete. As I stood up, my eyes caught a thin strand hanging off the ceiling beam. It was one of the innumerable roots that had slithered across the support beams. As I ran my flashlight across the ceiling, I saw that they also followed the pipes, vents, and electrical lines. The entire house had become a trellis for this thing. In the far corner, I noticed two thicker root tips hanging limply, different than the rest. When I took a step toward them, I realized they were shoe laces. A shoe hanging from the ceiling by vines. Another step forward, and that shoe was attached to a leg. As I came closer, I was able to see Mark held in the air by roots. Some roots simply supported him. Others were growing shallow into his skin, still visible like tortuous veins. Large roots weaved through the wall of his chest. His eyes were held open by small tendrils hooked in the corners of his eyelids. Two thicker roots disappeared into his mouth. Smaller roots followed their path and threaded between his teeth and down his throat. I hoped he was already dead. Then his eyes were pulled towards me and his lips began to move silently under the control of the roots. The roots around his chest tightened, forcing air out of him one word at a time in a raspy, muffled tone. He's almost ready. I swung my machete, trying to cut what was left of Mark's body down, but they recoiled in response, pulling Mark tightly to the ceiling. As they squeezed him tight, a sound of anger came from his body. A thick limb swept the floor and knocked me to the ground. Roots reached down from the ceiling and grabbed my arm to pull me closer to Mark. I used my weapon to free myself. Every cut root leaked the metallic-smelling sap. Some of it fell on my face. It burned. The basement lights flickered and the HVAC began to roar. I needed to get upstairs, and I needed to wash off the sap before it burned too deeply into my skin. The roots chased me into the den. The trunk was twisting and thickening before my eyes. Its branches writhed as the exposed roots spilled over the pot and shot across the floor. Offshoots went into the air vents and covered the doors and windows. The tree itself was still quite small, with its exposed roots now beet red. I ran to the front door, grabbed the knob, and twisted. Nothing. The knob would not turn. I looked down and saw the thin red roots threading through the edge of the door frame. They had grown into the seams. I saw them flex and relax under the paint, like a vein under the skin. I tried to pull harder. The door may have shifted half an inch, just enough for the roots to tighten back the gap. I ran desperately to the back door. Same thing. The kitchen window was my next best bet. I had it open about 2 inches when roots shot out, grabbed it, and slammed it shut with enough force to crack the glass. Then red roots spread across the pane, weaving through the broken glass until there was no opening left. I stopped for a moment, helpless, waiting for the roots to take hold, but nothing. Then there was tapping. One inside the kitchen wall, one beneath the floor in the den, 2 or 3 above me in the ceiling. Back and forth. The taps never seemed to happen at the same time, like they were waiting for the other to finish. Were they communicating or testing something? Maybe they were mapping the house, learning the exits, and closing them. I thought about the pot in the den, the stone with the roots displayed exactly how I wanted them. I thought about how I'd carefully shaped my tree. It was beauty through restraint. I failed to keep the tree contained. It found a bigger pot, and I was in it. Then the walls creaked, the floor under me gave a pop, and in the den, the leaves began to rustle. So, now I'm in my home office. I don't know if I want to slash my way through the window or try my luck at destroying the part of this thing still in the pot. I don't know if that would do any more than anger it, but I think it might be worth a shot. I can still hear the branches and the leaves rustling when I hear the occasional tapping and creaking. Small roots are sweeping their way under the door now, feeling around, exploring the new space. I'm not waiting for them to find me. I'm going to make a run for it and destroy whatever is still in that pot. If you see this post, do not order seeds from any site claiming to have accelerated stock. And if a box arrives without a postmark, do not open it. Do not give it soil. Do not give it water. Do not give it a pot. Do not give it a home. My best friend's name was Mr. Pallywag, by Crossing On Over. And before we read tonight's story, I wanted to tell you that the author of this story has just come out with his first book called Crossing On Over. It's a collection of his horror stories, such as Has Anyone Heard of the Crossing Hour, which you may have heard on this channel, and many others. He is an incredibly talented and chilling horror author, and I have a very good feeling that if you pick up his book, you're going to be spending many a night tucked under some cozy covers reading a chilling tale. And you can find the link to the book in the description below. Now, without further ado, here is tonight's story by Crossing On Over. Children ask a lot of questions, but they're never the right ones. For example, when I was a kid, I never asked my parents why we had to live in the middle of the woods. I never asked why our neighbors lived so far away, or why none of them had children. And I never asked why we had to turn off all the lights before sundown. I never suspected something was off because my parents were smart about it. They treated the lights rule like it was normal, so I did too. They even made a game out of it. Every sundown, the 3 of us would race around the house, scrambling to see who could turn off the most light switches. What could have been a traumatic memory was transformed into whimsical fun. But you can only cheat the inevitable so many times. One night, Dad was working late, Mom lost track of time for some reason, and I was distracted by my bionicles. The setting sun didn't cross my mind until Dad burst through the front door in a panic. I looked up, startled by the sudden entrance, and saw the sky behind him was pitch dark. "Honey, turn off the lights!" Dad barked as he dashed to the nearest light switch. My parents scrambled through the house in a panic, but I stayed calm. Thinking about it now, their urgency should have frightened me. But I was naive and invested in my game, so I continued playing until the house went completely dark. Reluctantly accepting that it was time for bed, I gathered up my Lego warriors and put them where they wouldn't get stepped on. Once all of them were safely accounted for, I looked out a nearby window and noticed twin lights staring out of the trees. At first, I was scared, but as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I realized it was just some critter out for an evening stroll. I knew that animals roamed the woods at night, but I'd never seen one get that close to the house before. Overcome by childish excitement, I waved hello to it. It waved back. "Carson?" Dad hissed, doing his best to stay quiet. "Where you at, bud?" "Shh," I whispered back. "You'll scare it off." "What?" Dad bolted into the room, his footsteps a clumsy contrast to the stillness of the night. I looked away from the window to shush him. When I turned back, the thing was gone. "Never mind, Dad," I said with a shrug. "It ran away." Dad sighed in relief and picked me up. I felt his heartbeat thunder in his chest as he checked to make sure the window was shut. "Don't worry about it," he whispered in a strained voice. "Come on, let's get to bed." Mom and Dad had me sleep with them for some reason, but otherwise the rest of the night was completely normal. There was no cataclysm, no punishment for breaking the rules, no ominous sense of dread lingering over the house. Life continued on normally, unaffected by the night's mistake. My parents were nervous at first, but laughed it off after a week or two. They never suspected something was off because Mr. Pallywag was smart about it. I still remember the day Mr. Pallywag introduced himself. Mom had left me to my own devices again, so I went out to the backyard and invented some game to keep myself occupied. Whatever I'd come up with must have been good, because I was so absorbed in what I was doing, it took me a while to realize someone was watching me. For a while, I pretended it was my imagination, but when I couldn't ignore the feeling of eyes peering out from the woods any longer, I stopped and scowled at the trees. "Quit being weird!" I shouted, my courage bolstered by youthful ignorance. "Come on out!" In response to my demands, a large bipedal creature shuffled out from the tree line. It was covered in a shaggy coat of gray fur, and its small, dark eyes reminded me of a great white shark's. It would have been frightening if not for the pork pie hat lightly perched on top of its head. Between the hat and its spotless white gloves, it looked more like a cartoon character come to life than an animal. "Hello," the creature said with a shy, friendly wave. "Do you live here?" "Uh-huh." "Oh, good. I'm your neighbor, Mr. Pallywag. Sorry it took so long for me to introduce myself. What's your name?" "Carson." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Carson. Are your parents home?" "Mom is, so you should stay back. She doesn't like it when animals get too close to the house." Mr. Pallywag frowned, which made him look even more cartoonish. I couldn't help laughing at his expression. "I don't see what's so funny," Mr. Pallywag huffed. I'm not an animal. I'm a respectable citizen. I'm sorry. You made a funny face, that's all. Oh, that's not a funny face. This is. Mr. Pallywag stuck out his tongue and bulged his eyes. It looked so goofy I nearly passed out from laughter. I laughed so loudly, Mom popped her head out of the window and asked me, What's so funny, Carson? Mr. Pallywag made a funny face. Mr. Pallywag? Yeah, don't you see him? Mom scanned the trees, a frown firmly etched on her face. I looked behind me to find that Mr. Pallywag had disappeared. That's weird, I said. He was right here. Honey, who's Mr. Pallywag? He's a big, furry monster wearing a hat. You can't miss him. Oh, Mom sighed, relieved. He's imaginary, then. Part of me wanted to argue, but I stayed quiet. If Mom didn't want to believe Mr. Pallywag was real, then that was her choice. Nothing worth arguing over. Besides, adults always hated being wrong. An argument could only end with me getting dragged inside. Well, I'll leave you boys to it. Have fun, okay? Okay. Mom went back to whatever she was doing. Once he was sure she wouldn't come back, Mr. Pallywag popped out from behind a tree and grinned at me. Sorry I called you a monster, I said quickly. But you got mad when I said animal, so... Oh, that's all right, Carson. I understand. But I won't forgive you unless you do something for me. What's that? Play a game with me! Mr. Pallywag cried, dramatically flourishing his hat. Okay. And just like that, I made a friend. Mr. Pallywag came to visit me as much as he could. Sometimes he'd go missing for days or even weeks, but I didn't mind. He always made up for it with a fantastic new story about his travels. I always liked stories, but my parents rarely told me any. Most nights it was too dark to read anything, and they were too busy during the day. Luckily, telling stories was Mr. Pallywag's favorite pastime, and I was happy to listen. Some nights, when I had trouble falling asleep, I would even crack the window open so Mr. Pallywag could continue telling me about his adventures. He was always happy to do it, but he never came into my room. I asked him why once, but he just shook his head and said my parents wouldn't like it. That makes sense to me now, but at the time, I thought it was silly. Mom didn't mind Mr. Pallywag at all. Dad did at first, but then one night he and Mom had a fight about it. It got really intense until Mom said it was perfectly normal for a kid with no friends to make one up. That made Dad go quiet. He didn't say anything about Mr. Pallywag again. I can't blame my parents for thinking Mr. Pallywag was imaginary. He was very good at hiding. In fact, he was so good that at first I tried to make a game out of catching him. Look, Mommy! I'd squeal with delight. He's behind the swing set! Oh, no, now he's behind the sandbox! But eventually, I let him hide without calling attention to it. He was quiet as the wind and quick as a fox, and nobody could find him if he didn't want to be found. I also got the feeling something bad would happen if my parents caught him. I didn't want that to happen. He was my best friend. Most of the time, Mr. Pallywag was content to play in my backyard, but he asked me to come into the woods with him twice. The first time happened because Mom yelled at me. Before I tell this part, I want to make it clear that Mom was not abusive. That said, she wasn't exactly Mother of the Year either. There were mitigating circumstances, granted. She didn't have a lot of friends, and we didn't leave the house much because of our isolation. Most days she was either alone or only had me for company. If that doesn't sound so bad, imagine being trapped in a remote cabin and the only person you can have a conversation with refuses to talk about anything that isn't related to cartoons or how hungry they are. Frankly, it's a miracle she didn't kill me. I was usually content to entertain myself, but one day, for whatever reason, all I wanted to do was spend time with her. "Mom, come play with me," I whined. "Not right now, honey," she said, doing her best to keep her voice calm. "Why don't you watch a movie?" "I don't wanna." "Well, how about you play your PlayStation?" "No, I want to play a real-life game." "Okay. Well, why don't you ask Mr. Pallywag to play with you?" "I don't want to play with Mr. Pallywag, I want to play with you." "Carson, I want to play! My tantrum raged on like that for a while. Mom tried to soothe me, but I refused to be sated. Finally, she snapped and shouted, "Enough!" The force of the shout shut me up immediately. "I can't play with you right now, Carson. I need some time to myself, okay? Just shut up and go outside." With that, Mom stormed to her bedroom and slammed the door shut. Tears welled up in my eyes as I scurried outside. It was my first rejection. I remember it better than my first kiss. For what felt like hours, I sat on my swing set and bawled. If Mom noticed, she didn't come out to comfort me. Odds are she was just holed up in the house somewhere, but at the time it felt like she was actively ignoring me. "Hey, Carson!" Mr. Pallywag's sudden appearance didn't surprise me. He'd made a habit of showing up out of nowhere. Normally, I pretended to be surprised, but I was so depressed I couldn't summon the energy for it. "Carson?" Mr. Pallywag asked. "You okay?" My mom yelled at me," I choked out between sniffles. "Oh no. Oh, come here, bud, it's okay." Mr. Pallywag opened his arms and wrapped me in a big hug. I always liked Mr. Pallywag's hugs. It was like hugging a big warm pillow. There was something else about them too, something that made you feel safe and protected. Kind of like falling asleep. "Tell you what," Mr. Pallywag said when I calmed down enough. "How about we do something special today?" "Special?" "Yeah! I'm gonna show you the best spot in the entire forest." I don't know. Mom and Dad said I can't go into the woods because it's dangerous." "That's not true," Mr. Pallywag replied as he patted my head. "They said you can't go into the woods alone. You're not alone if I'm with you, right? Besides, they won't even know you're gone if we're quick enough." For a moment, I hesitated. I was a good kid. I always followed the rules. But Mr. Pallywag had a point. If I was with him, I wouldn't be alone. And I wanted to get back at Mom somehow. I could bend the rules a little. Just once. Okay, I said. But we have to be quick. Deal. Mr. Pallywag took my hand and we walked into the woods together. It was a beautiful day. Birds chirped sonatas above us, and sunlight slipped through the cracks in the tree branches to cast macabre shadows on the ground. I made a game out of jumping from sunspot to sunspot. Mr. Pallywag thought it looked like fun, so he joined in as well. The two of us got so wrapped up in the game, I almost forgot how upset I'd been. Almost. Eventually, our route led us to a circular clearing. Mr. Pallywag strolled to the center of it and sat down with a great big sigh. I followed his lead and inspected my surroundings. The clearing felt peaceful, but there was something vaguely sad about it too. "This is my special spot, Carson," Mr. Pallywag said. "What do you think?" "I like it, but what makes it so special?" "Well, this is where most of my friends decide to come to the party." "Party? What party?" "Why, only the greatest, most fantabulous party ever. There's cakes, balloons, and games galore. And there's plenty of music and dancing." "And stories?" "Of course!" Mr. Pallywag laughed. "All the stories you could ever want." "That sounds nice," I said, trying to imagine it. "Are there other kids there?" "Oh yes, tons of kids." "Does everyone get along?" "Of course." "And nobody's left out?" "Nope." Good. We sat in silence for a while. I didn't mind. Silences felt okay with Mr. Pallywag. Not like when Dad went quiet. That was usually a sign he was about to start lecturing me about how I didn't clean my room enough, or I was spending too much time on the television, or something. It wasn't like when Mom got quiet either. When she got quiet, it was because she was mad and didn't want us to know. It didn't work, though. I always knew. Something in the trees caught my eye. It was slowly swinging back and forth, like the pendulum in my grandma's old clock. I watched it for a while, back and forth, but couldn't figure out what it was. Part of me wanted to go take a closer look, but Mr. Pallywag squeezed my shoulder before I had the chance. "Okay, Carson," he said. "It's time to go back home now." "Oh, really? Can't we go to the party instead?" Mr. Pallywag grinned. For the first time, I noticed how large his teeth were. They weren't sharp fangs or anything, they were just large. I had a sudden urge to run away, but I ignored it. "One day," Mr. Pallywag said, taking my hand. "But not just yet." "Why not?" "You're not sad enough." I wasn't sure what Mr. Pallywag meant, but I let him lead me away from the clearing without complaint. As we entered the woods, I glanced over my shoulder, hoping to get one last look at whatever was swaying back there. No luck. It was too well hidden by the foliage. "Let's race," Mr. Pallywag said. "Last one there's a grounded swallow." Mr. Pallywag let go of my hand and sprinted into the woods. I ran after him, the swinging object forgotten. When we got back, he stopped me and knelt down to my eye level. "One quick thing before you go," Mr. Pallywag whispered. "Promise you won't tell your parents about my special place, okay?" "Why not?" "Well, it's not very special if everyone knows about it, right?" It made sense, but there was an icky feeling in my gut as I nodded and swore to keep it a secret. "Thanks, Carson. I'll see you later, okay?" I smiled and nodded again. Mr. Pallywag grinned and gave me a big hug goodbye. I hugged him back and walked into the house. When I ambled into the kitchen, I found Mom crying at the kitchen table. "Mom?" "Carson!" Mom wailed. "Where were you?" She didn't let me answer before she scrambled over and wrapped me in a bone-crushing hug. "I'm fine, Mommy," I said, shocked. "I just went into the woods with Mr. Pallywag." "Carson, what have I told you about going into the woods alone?" "But I wasn't alone. Mr. Pallywag was..." "Mr. Pallywag doesn't count. You're not allowed to leave the backyard unless you're with me or Daddy. Do you understand?" "But..." "No buts. Honestly, what were you thinking?" "It was Mr. Pallywag's idea. He said..." "I don't care what he said. I was worried sick about you." I thought about protesting more, but I didn't bother. There was no use fighting her. As promised, I didn't tell my parents about Mr. Pallywag's secret spot. I didn't tell them about the party either. Something in my gut said they wouldn't like it. At some point, I went back to school, but the only thing I remember about it is getting bullied. I tried talking to the nicer kids about Mr. Pallywag once. They didn't care. I stopped trying. Thinking back on it, nobody in my family had many friends. I guess that's why we all loved Uncle Dan so much. Uncle Dan was born in that backwater town and never quite managed to escape, but he didn't let it get to him. My parents liked him, and I was thrilled whenever he came over. He was no Mr. Pallywag, mind, but he was the closest anyone got. Unlike most adults, Uncle Dan took time to make sure I was feeling okay. He was a great listener, too. No matter what the topic was, he'd patiently allow me to ramble about it until I'd exhausted myself. If it was something bad, he'd offer sympathy or advice. If I was just talking about Power Rangers or my latest video game, he'd run his fingers through his thick red beard and let out a low whistle of amazement. "Wow," he'd say in a tone implying I'd solved world hunger. "That really is something, kiddo. Thanks for sharing." When most people said stuff like that, I knew they were only saying it to humor me. Uncle Dan was special because I believed him. One time, I asked Uncle Dan why he liked talking to me so much. He got real serious and said it reminded him of spending time with his daughter. I asked if I could meet her sometime. He got real quiet and shook his head. I didn't ask about her again. For some reason, the one thing I didn't tell Uncle Dan about was Mr. Pallywag. In fact, he might never have known if I hadn't shown him my drawing. It was just a crayon scribble of Mr. Pallywag waving hello. But I'd gotten the hat just right, and I was proud of my work. Obviously, the next time Uncle Dan came over, I made it a priority to show him my masterpiece. Uncle Dan, look what I drew! I chirped as I shoved the drawing at him. Carson, Dad scolded, smiling despite himself. Give him a second to breathe. That's all right, Keith. Uncle Dan chuckled. Let's see what Picasso whipped up for us. Uncle Dan ruffled my hair and took the drawing. The second he saw what it was, his smile vanished. I waited for him to say something, suddenly self-conscious. He was quiet for so long, I looked to Dad for reassurance. He looked just as confused as I was. Uncle Dan? I asked. It's great, Carson. Uncle Dan replied, his hands and voice shaking. Great job. What's this fella's name? Mr. Pallywag. Uncle Dan's face went pale. That's fun, he said in a low, emotionless voice. Carson, would you excuse us for a moment? There's something I need to talk to your dad about. Okay. Unnerved, I left the room. I'd never seen an adult act like that before. I knew I shouldn't have eavesdropped, but I was so worried about Uncle Dan, I stopped by the doorway to listen in. Jesus, Dan, what's wrong? You look pale. How long has Carson been talking about this thing? I'm sorry. Mr. Pallywag, how long? Oh, right, a couple of months, I think. Months? Uncle Dan yelled. Yeah, the kid's got an imaginary friend, so what? Have you been leaving the lights on? No, of course not. Well, okay, we did once, but that was... Fuck! Mom must have walked in because I heard her ask, What's going on? Dan, are you all right? You have to move, Uncle Dan insisted. Now. Move? I don't... We're not moving, Dad snapped. Don't give me that tough guy shit, Keith. Christ, I should have figured this would happen. Excuse me. What gives you the right to shut up and listen? Jenny drew that thing too. Right before... The house went deathly quiet. I could just barely hear Uncle Dan quietly sobbing. It made me uncomfortable, so I slunk off to my room. I didn't come out until Mom called me for dinner. As I sat down at the table, I looked over to Uncle Dan. It was like nothing had happened. He even shot me a cheerful thumbs up. Sorry for the scare, kiddo, he said. I remembered something really important. Boring, grown-up stuff, nothing you need to worry about. I nodded and pretended everything was fine. Uncle Dan was doing a good job acting normal, but my parents couldn't keep up the facade. Little things gave them away. They'd laugh a little too long at Uncle Dan's jokes, or they'd shoot me a worried glance when they thought I wasn't looking. The second Uncle Dan left, my folks turned out the light. Carson, why don't you go get ready for bed? Mom asked. But it isn't even dark yet. I know, but your dad wants to read you a story. Really? Yes, really. I dashed to the bathroom and got ready for bed in record time. When I was done, I jumped into bed, and Dad walked in with a beat-up old book. Hey, bud, Dad said in a soft voice. All set? I nodded, too excited to speak. Good. I've been saving this one until you were old enough. It's called Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. With great care, Dad gingerly flipped to the first chapter and began to read. I fell in love with it immediately. After finishing the chapter about poor old Bill the Lizard, Dad shut the book and smiled at me. Well, liking it so far? Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Mr. Pallywag's stories. The corner of Dad's mouth flickered. Oh yeah? He asked. Yeah? You do the voices better, though. Well, glad I've got that going for me. Suddenly, Dad sniffed and wrapped me in a gigantic hug. That startled me. Dad wasn't opposed to hugging, but he rarely initiated. Carson, you know Mom and I love you very much, right? Uh-huh. And that we only want what's best for you, right? Uh-huh. Okay. Good. I hugged him back and we sat there for a while in uncomfortable silence. It might have been my imagination, but I swear I felt a tear drop onto the back of my neck. After what felt like forever, Dad sighed, let me go, and gently punched my shoulder. Good night, kiddo, Dad said softly. Love you. Love you too, Dad. Dad smiled, turned out the light, and shut the door. I sat in bed and watched the sunset. I had a feeling something significant had happened, but I was too young to understand what it was. My parents were different after that night. Dad used to be content to spend weekends at home, but suddenly he wanted to spend every free moment away from the house. The nearest thing to do was an hour's drive away, but he didn't care. The longer the trip, the better. Mom changed too. She went from always wanting space to constantly occupying mine. If I was playing video games, she'd read her book on the couch nearby. If I was making something with my Lego set, she would develop a keen interest in the construction effort. If I vaguely stated I was interested in something, she'd help me become the world's expert in it. Because of my parents' sudden interest in my affairs, I didn't see Mr. Pallywag for weeks. They never officially told me to stop talking about him, but I could tell they didn't like him anymore. Whenever I mentioned wanting to play in the backyard, they always found some excuse to keep me inside the house. Then, one night, my parents sat me down to talk. Neither bothered hiding the relieved expressions on their faces. "Great news, buddy," Dad said. "I got a new job. We're going to be moving soon." "Really?" "Yep. We're going to the city, far away from these boring old woods." "What about Mr. Pallywag?" "Well, Mr. Pallywag is staying here," Mom replied, shooting my dad an unreadable glance. "What? Why can't he come with us?" "He just can't," Dad said forcefully. "I mean, the forest is his home, right? It wouldn't be fair to make him move out too." "If he can't come, I don't want to leave." "Carson." "No!" Despite my parents' best efforts, I bawled for hours. No matter what they tried, I refused to be comforted. I loved my parents, and Uncle Dan, sure, but they were family. Mr. Pallywag was my only friend. I was inconsolable until I remembered Mr. Pallywag's party. Somehow, my childish logic determined that the party was the solution to all my problems. If I could just figure out how to get there, everything would be all right. I wouldn't have to move. I wouldn't have to leave Mr. Pallywag behind. I wouldn't have to feel alone. My feelings about the move didn't deter my parents' plans. Within a week, they had all of our stuff packed and ready to go. I tried my hardest to see Mr. Pallywag, but Mom and Dad refused to leave my side. It was looking like I'd never get to go to the party. Then, when I'd finally given up hope, I stumbled into my opening. The day before the move, Dad was trying yet again to sell me on our new home. "You're going to love it, bud," he said. "There are lots of other kids in the neighborhood." I didn't reply. The phone rang. Dad ignored it. I faintly heard Mom answer it in the other room. "I bet you'll make tons of new friends," he said. "No, I won't. They'll be mean to me." "Oh, you don't know that." "Yeah, I do." "Honey?" Mom called. "It's the mill. Something about paperwork?" Dad swore under his breath and dashed out of the room. I stayed behind and scanned the room, bored. That's when I saw the unguarded back door. I knew I wouldn't get another chance. I crept to the door and opened it as quietly as I could. After making sure my parents weren't coming, I scanned the trees for any signs of life. "Mr. Pallywag?" I whispered. "Mr. Pallywag, are you there?" "Shh! Over here, Carson! Quick!" Without thinking, I bolted into the woods. I didn't get far before something strong and furry yanked me behind a tree. It put a hand over my mouth and shushed me. "Carson!" I heard Dad call. "Carson? Where'd you get to?" "Stay quiet, okay?" Mr. Pallywag whispered in my ear. "Carson, this isn't funny! Carson!" Mr. Pallywag placed me on his back, dropped to all fours, and dashed into the woods. I gasped and held on tightly to his neck. I'd never seen Mr. Pallywag run that fast before. It was exhilarating. I would have enjoyed it more if Dad hadn't sounded so distraught. This next part won't make any sense unless I talk about Eli Miller. Bad timing, I know, but bear with me. I didn't know Eli very well. He was a teenager. And even if we were the same age, he wasn't the type of guy Mom would want me to hang out with. He was the resident troubled kid. Graffiti, antagonizing the police, drinking, that kind of thing. Dad always shook his head whenever he came out. I think that was his way of saying he felt sorry for it. Even though I heard a lot of stories about Eli, I only saw him in person once. Mom had dragged me along on a shopping trip to our local Dollar General, and I wasn't overly thrilled about being there. Normally, Mom insisted that I stay close to her when she was shopping, but that day she said I could browse the books by myself as long as I didn't leave the aisle. I was thrilled. It was one of my first tastes of freedom, and I capitalized on it immediately. As I browsed through the scattered copies of Animorphs and Goosebumps, Eli strolled into the aisle without a care in the world. He whistled a tuneless song, picked a magazine off the shelf, and casually flipped through it. I was so low to the ground that he didn't notice me. Something about the way Eli flipped through the magazine made me stop and watch him with juvenile fascination. After a minute or two, Eli scanned the store. When he thought nobody was watching, he casually slipped the magazine into the inner pocket of his jacket. A perfect crime. That was when he caught me staring at him. He froze, his hand still clutching his stolen loot. I knew I should have called someone over or told him off for stealing or something. Instead, I put a finger to my lips. Eli smirked, nodded at me, and walked away. He didn't get to the end of the aisle before he stopped and looked back at me. I kept my finger on my lips in silent assurance. A weird expression spread across his face. He rocked on the balls of his feet and kept glancing from me to the door. He was home free, and he knew it. And yet, Eli shut his eyes and sighed. He removed the magazine from his pocket and put it back on the shelf. I cocked my head, confused. "Don't steal, kid," Eli whispered. I smiled at him and nodded. He shot me a wink and left the store. I never told anyone else about it, but that little encounter left a big impact on me. Weird as it sounds, Eli transformed into a sort of Robin Hood figure in my head. Someone who understood right and wrong in a way stuffy adults couldn't. He was a living legend. A hero, maybe. That's why I was devastated when he killed himself. I never got the full story. From what I heard, the poor kid hung himself in the woods without leaving a note. It took a week for anyone to notice he'd gone missing. It took another 2 for somebody to find him. What hurt the most was the injustice of it. In all the stories I'd heard, dying alone in the woods was a fate reserved for villains. Eli deserved better. It wasn't fair. After Eli's death, I had a recurring nightmare. In it, I'd be walking alone in the woods. I could feel something watching me, but I couldn't see it because it was hidden by the trees. Eventually, I'd start running, but thick vines would lash around my throat and yank me off the forest floor. The vines would lift me off the ground by the neck, higher and higher, and the higher I got, the harder it was to breathe, and I would choke and choke and choke until I finally woke up, panicking and screaming. I still have that nightmare sometimes. Mr. Pallywag didn't stop running until we reached his secret spot. I gave him a moment to catch his breath, then climbed off and wrapped him in a massive hug. "I missed you," I whispered. "I missed you too." "I'm moving away tomorrow." "I know." "I don't want to leave," I sniffled. "Can I go to the party instead?" There was a brief pause. "Oh, I don't know," Mr. Pallywag said with calculated indifference. "I'm sure you'd have much more fun living in your fancy new house in the city." "No, Mr. Pallywag, I don't want to move. I want to stay here with you." "More than anything?" I nodded. "More than anything in the whole wide world?" I nodded again and looked up to see Mr. Pallywag's expression. He was grinning, and there was a triumphant expression in his dark eyes. "Well, if you're absolutely sure," he said, "I guess I can arrange it. But there's a few things we have to do first." "Like what?" Mr. Pallywag pulled off his hat and rummaged around inside it. "Let me see. It's around here somewhere. Ah, there it is." With solemn dignity, Mr. Pallywag pulled a long, thick rope out of his hat. The rope kept going and going, to the point where I laughed at how absurdly long it was. Mr. Pallywag laughed too, and ended the bit by dumping the rest onto the ground. Then, suddenly serious, he picked up one end of the rope and held it where I could see. "Watch carefully, Carson," he said. "You have to get this just right, or it won't work." I paid close attention as Mr. Pallywag slowly tied a knot with the rope. It wasn't very complicated. A couple simple moves and he'd made a knot which left a big loop at the end. When he was done, Mr. Pallywag undid the knot and handed me the rope. "Easy, right? Now you try." Slowly, I copied Mr. Pallywag's technique. My knot looked just like his when I was done. He took the rope and gave it a couple firm yanks. The knot held. "Great job, Carson! You're so smart!" "Now watch this." Mr. Pallywag held up the rope and snapped his fingers. To my amazement, the inside of the loop shimmered, blurred together, and rearranged into strange kaleidoscopic shapes. "Wow!" I exclaimed. "Is that magic?"
Of course it is, Carson. Not only that, it's a portal that goes directly to the party. Here, have a look.
Mr. Pallywag held out the rope, and I leaned in closer to see. There was a large room on the other side of the portal. The room was brightly decorated and filled wall to wall with people. Most of them were kids. No sound came through the portal, but I could see people having animated conversations and laughing. What a party it was! It was everything I'd hoped it would be. There was cake and pizza and a ton of TVs with all my favorite movies and games on them. Everyone was having so much fun. I didn't see anyone who looked excluded or bullied or unwanted. It was like something out of a dream. A red-haired girl on the other side of the portal noticed me and enthusiastically waved hello. I waved back. The girl pointed me out to some of the other partygoers, and they all began beckoning me over. I couldn't hear them, but I could see their mouths moving as they shouted encouragement. For some reason, I couldn't stop staring at the girl. She looked vaguely familiar, but Mr. Pallywag yanked the rope away before I could figure out why.
Now, Mr. Pallywag began, there are a few things we have to do before you can go to the party. Are you ready?
Uh-huh.
Great! Well, first, you'll need your invitation.
Mr. Pallywag cleared his throat, grinned a wide, toothy smile, and took a deep bow.
Carson, on this most momentous of days, I hereby offer you an exclusive invitation to the greatest party there ever is, was, or will be, good for whenever, wherever, whatever, and forever. Do you accept?
I giggled and said, "Yes!" A soft wind blew through the trees. Something changed, something subtle, a muffled static in the air. A slight shift to the left. A delay so tiny no one would ever notice. The only word I can think of to describe it is magic settling in. Old and powerful magic mankind chose to leave behind. I didn't like it.
Wonderful! Mr. Pallywag said, clapping his hands. Just 2 more steps, and you can go to the party. The first one's easy. All you have to do is pick a tree.
I nodded and began inspecting the nearby trees in turn. Midway through my search, something in the forest stole my attention. I squinted and leaned towards it to get a better look. It was a yellow strip of police tape. The strip blew gently in the breeze, tracing lazy shapes in the air. It marked the spot where I'd seen the swinging thing last time. I frowned and turned back to Mr. Pallywag. He was still smiling, but there was something hard in his eyes.
Something wrong, Carson?
No.
Good. Which tree did you pick?
Despite a sudden sense of unease, I pointed at my tree. Mr. Pallywag walked me over to it and positioned me under one of the branches. The branch looked thick and sturdy.
Good choice, Carson. Very good choice.
Mr. Pallywag nodded in approval and showed me the portal again. The red-haired girl was there, waiting for me. She shot me a huge, sincere smile and held up a slice of cake. It was my favorite, a corner piece of red velvet with tons of icing. The icing had even been lathered into a big letter C, just for me. "Hey, Mr. Pallywag?" I said, unable to contain my curiosity. "Who's that girl?"
"Oh, that's Jenny. She's a very good friend of mine. Do you two know each other?"
The name was familiar, but I couldn't place it. I shook my head.
"Well, you'll get to know each other soon enough. Just one last step, and you'll be at the party."
"What is it?"
"It's very easy. Just put your head through the loop and close your eyes real tight."
An intense, shaky feeling shot through my body. I took an involuntary step back.
What's wrong?" Mr. Pallywag asked. "Everyone's waiting. See?"
His smile didn't waver as he pointed at the portal. All of the party-goers were gathered in a big crowd. They were clapping and chanting something. I couldn't hear them, but I knew it was my name. I instinctively scanned their faces. It didn't take me long to find the one I was looking for. When he caught me looking at him, he held a finger to his lips and winked. Eli. I felt the blood drain from my face as I backed away from the rope. Mr. Pallywag chuckled.
"Oh, it's okay, Carson," he said, his voice as friendly as ever. "I won't lie, it's scary at first, but don't worry. When it's done, you get to stay at the party forever. Just you, me, and all of our friends. Doesn't that sound fun?"
Mr. Pallywag's grin widened. I'd never realized how big he was before. About the size of a grizzly bear, maybe even bigger. I wanted to run, but I'd seen how fast he was. There was no way I'd be able to get away from him. I thought about the night Dad read me Alice, about the long hug he gave me, and the tear rolling down my neck. With as much courage as I could muster, I shook my head. I don't want to go to the party anymore.
Don't be silly, Carson. Everyone wants to go to the party.
I don't.
Carson.
I shook my head again. Mr. Pallywag stopped smiling.
Did you know I can see the future, Carson?
He asked in a low growl.
I saw yours the moment I met you. Want to know what I saw?
No.
Oh, it's so awful, it makes me want to cry,
he said, his mouth contorting into a massive frown.
You're always a little bit different. A little bit off. People don't notice it at first, but they always find out, and when they do, they abandon you.
Shut up! You're lying!
No, I'm not. Mr. Pallywag droned, an annoyed teacher lecturing his student. You're going to end up all alone, Carson. No lovers, no friends. Eventually, you won't even have a family. No mommy, or daddy, or Uncle Dan. Nothing but a slow, depressing slide into endless misery.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Don't fight it, Carson. You already know I'm right. Something rustled in the woods. Dad's panicked voice echoed out soon after.
Carson? Carson, where are you?
The corner of Mr. Pallywag's mouth flickered. I started to yell, but Mr. Pallywag was on me in a flash. I closed my eyes and waited for the rope to close around my neck. To my surprise, Mr. Pallywag just clasped his hand over my mouth. When I opened my eyes, he was grinning at me again. You already accepted the invitation, he said. Just follow the steps when you change your mind. I nodded, too afraid to do anything else. Mr. Pallywag chuckled, uncovered my mouth, and walked away. Goodbye, Carson, and see you soon. In the blink of an eye, Mr. Pallywag was gone. Dad burst out of the trees moments later. When he saw me, he nearly bowled me over and wrapped me in a hug so tight I thought my spine would snap. Thank God, Dad kept whispering. Thank you, God, thank you. I didn't say anything. Dad took me home. Mom held me close. And none of us ever discussed the incident again. We were too relieved to jinx the miracle. The move went as planned. I never went back to those woods again. I did my best to move on, tried to make friends, even attempted dating a few times. But so far, Mr. Pallywag's been right. Nobody stays. My parents are still alive, but we don't talk much anymore. Uncle Dan's dead. I talk to my coworkers a little, but I'm basically alone. Sometimes, on really bad nights, I pull out some rope and tie that special knot. I let the loop shimmer, peek through the portal, and watch the party. More people join every year. Jenny and Eli are still there. They haven't aged a day. They look happy. Mr. Pallywag is there too, of course. He always knows when I'm watching. He stops what he's doing, looks me in the eye, and waves at me. I wave back. When he knows he has my full attention, he claps his hands and leads his guests in a mad dance. He whirls among them, hat in hand, dancing and singing and laughing. The party guests follow along, delirious with glee. I've tried to find a flaw with the party, an ulterior motive, or a sign that it's part of some sinister master plan.
The problem is, it's perfect. Nobody disappears. Nobody's in pain. There's nothing there but fun and games and acceptance and love. And though it's hard, I don't want to give up. I tell myself stories where I'm the hero. And no matter how dark it gets, I have to live. It's worked for a while. But every year it gets harder. And deep down, I'm scared Mr. Pallywag was right. It's not if I go to the party. It's when.